Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today we have a special show today. We're bringing in Bobby Skinner for an interview. And for those who have talked to us in the past and said, why don't we have more Talkin Giants Big Blue Banter mashups? Well, now you're getting one. We've been on Bobby's show, Talkin Giants, and both Nick and I separately, but I realized we never had Bobby or Justin on. And so today we're going to do a fun show. We're obviously going to get to some of the stuff that Bobby can provide that I know you guys love, the film insights, but I also wanted to talk to him about his journey into the industry and with Talkin Giants. This is kind of a throwback to another friend of mine who's in the industry, not Giants industry, but fantasy football industry, Matt Harmon. You might know him from Reception. His first podcast was called Backyard Banter, and he literally just had on fantasy analysts. They didn't talk about fantasy. They talked about the journey, and a lot of people liked it. So I thought it would be cool to get that going with Bobby today. But before we do any of that, we do want to talk to you about the news of the day because this interview happened to happen during a big breaking news day, and there's multiple news items today for the Giants. We'll talk about the PUP list players as well. But the big news today is the Giants came to an agreement with Saquon Barkley. He will sign a deal. It's a one-year deal, a little bit more than the franchise tag. What was your initial reaction to this, Bobby?
So I floated out last week that maybe they could get some type of deal done and then put a clause in that, hey, there's going to be no franchise tag next year. Like we're eliminating that or it being $2 million more just to get him to camp. So when I first saw it, I'm like, okay, when you see the money, it's like that's got to be the tag clause. And then you find out the tag clause is not in there. But then you find out the incentives are higher than what he did last year, plus making the playoffs, where it's like, man, he's never reached these incentives really, besides the receptions and the touchdowns his rookie season. And it's like this, like it's kind of been a lost art of the player taking a team friendly and doing what's best for the team over his self-interest. Like we don't see that anymore. It's kind of a lost art. And Saquon Barkley did that, which is kind of like it threw you into shock because it's like this doesn't make any sense for Saquon Barkley besides the fact that he just wants to be a Giant and be in camp and continue to try and be the face of the franchise.
It was somewhat surprising to me. I mean, after all the drama and the deliberation and him going on the podcast, which I know happened prior to the Giants not actually giving him the long-term contract, it did seem like that the Saquon contract agreement, it reminded me a little bit of the Nathan For You episode, Dan, where Nathan convinces the Craigslist guy to change his name to Michael Richards for $1,001 when the same guy just denied that offer for $1,000 just because he felt like he got one over on Nathan. It kind of reminded me of that, did it not, Dan?
I got that sense. I think for me, the main sense I got, and that's a great reference for those who are fans of the show, the main feeling I got, or I guess the surprise feeling for me was, I think that he as a person, like last week, what did we see happen? We saw that Sports Illustrated took a quote from him, and I think Pro Football Talk did as well, or one of those other outlets that was like, if I want to, I can say F you to the Giants. And they didn't really run with the tone of the interview or what he said after that, but they ran with that. And I got the feeling that after that moment, Saquon was like, if I hold out for the rest of camp, I'm going to have to be dealing with that every single day, every time I look on social media, every time I talk to a friend or a teammate. And that's not what he's about. And to me, what was so interesting and surprising about this decision was, and I know it's not an apples to apples comparison with what Michael Strahan did in 2007, where he didn't held out. He kind of was basically like, I don't want to go to training camp. I'm 30 plus years old. I'll come show up in September. I know the system. I know I don't have any real reason to be here. I was kind of surprised Barkley came back right away for the full grind of training camp. Like, this is a true grind for these guys. Like, he could have easily just taken a month off. He could have trained with his trainer. It would have been a lot less intense and physical. And then he comes back. He already knows the system. He was there last year. So I was kind of surprised he went for the full grind of camp. But this just kind of shows what kind of teammate I think that he is.
Well, and it was always an empty threat for him to miss games, but he didn't even make them do the start of camp presser. Like, right. You should at least make them sweat through that, and maybe you could get like an extra $500,000 if you make them go through that press conference and do Saquon questions. But you made a point where, one, he truly wants to be a great teammate, and it would have ate him alive to not be there with the team. Been there 5 years, coming off their first playoff victory. Daniel Jones gets his contract. Shep is back, his friends. It would have ate him alive. But he's also hyper-focused on his self-image and a little sensitive. And I think, like you said, Dan, he was not going to be able to deal with 6 weeks of the fan base that loves him turning on him. Because even if it's not right, they were going – that's just what happens with fandom. the fan base was going to turn on him, whether it is the people like us who are in it every single day or the casual fans who just, watch the first preseason game and then tune in week one.
Right.
And I don't think he was ready for that.
Saquon's got Dumbo ears, Dan.
Bobby.
He hears a lot.
Yeah.
Saquon.
He hears and he reads a lot, and he
hears.
He gets bothered by it too.
Exactly. Remember before last season, he went on a podcast and he was talking about how, I think Ed Valentine actually asked him a question at a press conference about how he's not a North and South runner, about how that narrative was out there. And he almost bit Ed's head off after that question, which was before the Tennessee game. And he went on a podcast and he was like airing his frustrations about how he's going to go all out. And he was cursing. We're like, holy shit, Saquon Barkley curses? This doesn't really seem like the Saquon Barkley we know and love. And he ended up proving everybody wrong because he had one dominant season, but he definitely hears the criticism.
Before we move past the Saquon stuff, I want to ask you both this question because it was something I brought up on our podcast, Nick, when we reacted to the news, or the original news when they didn't sign him to the tender. I thought that, or to a long-term deal, I figured in that moment it was a telling sign that he wasn't going to be a Giant for his career and that he didn't really have much of a future beyond at max next season. Does this change that opinion for you guys at all? And Bobby, if you didn't have that opinion to begin with, you can explain that as well.
So I think it would be really grimy for the Giants to tag him again after Saquon Barkley did this for the team. And I've been a proponent of franchise tagging him since before free agency started. That was my goal with his injury history. It just worries me way too much. We could talk about the running back position, and I agree with a lot of that, but I'm not as heavy on it. But specifically him with his injury history and his history of not always dealing with just being banged up very well. But a second time after he did this for you, would be really grimy. So maybe there's some like handshake agreement of, hey, we might tag you, but we will facilitate a trade. But also after this offseason, whatever offer the Giants end up offering within the year, he might be quick to take it. Because if he hits the open market, he may not get what the Giants originally offered, and he's in an uncomfortable situation again. So I'm going to say that he is a Giant because he wants to be. I think he wants to be. If the Giants offer him something reasonable in January, he'll take it.
But do you think they will offer him that again? Is kind of my bigger question. Do you think that, because I think we can come to the conclusion that this year maybe it was either one of two things. One, that they had an offer and they felt like that was their offer and they were going to stick to it. Or that, a year later with another season of tread on his tires, they may not believe that it makes sense for them to make another long-term offer.
It's so tough to say because on paper, I wouldn't. But this isn't an on-paper league where he is important to the franchise. He's been hopefully he's not as big of a part of the offense as he was this year. But I'm going to say that they do offer him something.
Okay.
As long as he doesn't get like a big injury or anything this year.
You're in that same boat, Nick?
It all depends on, you got to take this week by week at this point, even practice by practice. But I wouldn't be shocked as I sit here right now if the Giants extend an olive branch to him and try to bring him back on a reasonable deal. And that's one of the parts of the Saquon Barkley dialogue that gets lost, is the fact that the Giants did offer him a market valued contract during the bye week, or I think it was during the bye week, right? Like they wanted him to come back. And I see a lot of people being like, the Giants disrespected Saquon Barkley before this deal. Everyone was saying that in like the national media. It's like, no, they didn't. They offered him a deal. He said, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to ride this out and I think I can get more. And the Giants were like, no, we don't believe you're worth more. And that's kind of what ended up happening over the last several months. I don't feel like, forgetting that Joe Shane in the front office actually extended a pretty reasonable contract to a running back, a depreciating market position. I think forgetting that is kind of just a terrible way to go about having an honest conversation.
Yeah, that's fair. I think my take on it would be if the Giants build on what they did last year and are winning games and headed to the playoffs, he has a much better chance of re-signing long-term. If things go wrong, the schedule's tougher, whatever it may be, and they're not in the playoffs, I don't think he has any chance of re-signing with this team personally, if they're not making the playoffs.
That's fair.
One more thing on what you said, Bobby, before we move on from this, I just thought was interesting. You said in a best case scenario, you didn't say this, but I know you meant this. In a best case scenario, he's used less in this. Like we're relying on him less this year, which obviously means we're relying on more Daniel Jones in the passing game. I want to see them rely a little bit more on Barkley as a receiver. If he's supposedly able to do these things that he thinks he's able to do, like McCaffrey, like Kamara, I want to see it because we're 5 years in now, and I haven't seen what he's supposed to be capable of doing on more than a handful of reps. Someone showed me a rep from 2 years ago against the Chargers. I think it was Glennon playing, and he had a really nice
moves
route.
are not examples of good reps.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. To me, I wonder if I can't stand when people use double moves as an example of great route running, because double moves are almost like trick plays.
Yeah.
Like show me how you run a stick or a slant or a skinny post, or that.
Right.
Those show me how good of a route runner you are. Not double moves to me are sometimes like
it's those 90-degree
plays
cuts
to me. Yeah.
Yeah. 90 grand goes out. So I want to see that because he says he's able to do that. He wants to be paid like that. So that would be a good sign for me in the book of like, I want to keep going forward with Barkley as well. If I see him grow as a receiver and a route runner for that matter. But actually, before we get into this interview, one more quick thing, Nick, I know you put up in the notes, all the guys on the pup list. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, let's just go through them. And I'm sure you and I in a future podcast will go into this a little bit more in detail. But the players who were placed on the pup, there were actually 6 Giants, 5 of which tore their ACL last year playing for the Giants. And that's wide receivers Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, offensive guard Marcus McKethan, defensive tackles DJ Davidson and A'Shawn Robinson from his torn meniscus, which was somewhat surprising. I mean, I didn't expect him to get put on the pup, but I could be wrong there. And then wide receiver Jamison Crowder was put on the non-football injury list. Defensive tackle Vernon Butler was placed on the reserve do not report list. And then cornerback Leonard Johnson was waived with an injury settlement. And then another pup member that I forgot to mention was Aaron Robinson, who landed on the pup, which isn't all that surprising. But Bobby, what are your takeaways from this list, your immediate takeaways?
Well, one, having the last name Robinson is a bad omen on the Giants. Three guys. Here's my takeaway: Jamison Crowder on the Cole Beasley's going to be taking second team reps to start camp.
Oh yeah,
right.
It's kind of crazy. So Shep and Wan'Dale I expect to be back. A'Shawn, I would assume so too. The one that's interesting on me and the player I haven't fully given up on yet is Aaron Robinson, because he was drafted to be a slot corner, and that's where he fits best. I mean, he's physical in the run game, and he's a player that I'm interested to watch this camp because he was forced on the outside last year and then got hurt. But he's a player I haven't totally given up on as that nickel corner player. So, but nothing was really surprising on there besides the Jamison Crowder non-football injury list.
I wasn't expecting A'Shawn, but maybe I just haven't looked too much into that. And maybe that's part of the reason his market value was so depressed this offseason as a free agent. I don't know. Aaron Robinson's the one that stands out the most to me. Like you said, Bobby, I heard at the time when he got that injury, it was a lot worse than just your typical injury. And people have to remember, it's not like every injury isn't the same. Not everybody recovers the same. Everybody has different remember when Adrian Peterson tore his ACL, everyone's like, oh my God, look, he was able to do it. It's like, no, Dr. James Andrews said he had the cartilage of a newborn baby. Like, not everyone's born with that kind of knee cartilage in there. So I just worry a little bit about the Robinson one lingering, because I've heard bad things about that. But I agree with you, on paper, he is someone who could actually impact the team this year. So maybe it's just a little thing and he gets back quickly. But I just thought that one stood out to me. The rest I kind of expected, obviously outside A'Shawn.
James Robinson needs to show up like the bubble boy at training camp right now.
Oh, I forgot we had a different Robinson too.
Yeah, we
wow,
did.
He's the guy that's coming off of injuries. Very nice.
Exactly.
And we'll see what happens there now with Barkley resign. All right, let's dive into this real quick. And actually, one more quick thing, because I saw you put this in the notes, Nick, and I am curious to get Bobby's reaction. Any thoughts on Ellerson Smith being cut?
Well, one, he was part of me and Nick doing the mid-round prospect draft preview in 2021, which it's just a shame to see those guys go. It's just we never got to see him play football. He was always a potential pick, right? Like I remember when me and Nick talked to him, I was like, man, there's some pass rush athleticism there. He's long, athletic, but he's also was like god awful in the run game. But he got bigger. Like he missed that year, got bigger, was better at the Senior Bowl. And it's like, all right, let's see what this guy is now. And you just never got to see him. I mean, we saw flashes, and he was still bad in the run game when we did see that. But we never really saw him just like line up over a tackle and rush him 4 straight times, which it's a shame that happened. But I also wasn't banking on Ellerson. And we talked about it on our Camp Position Battles pod today, is that edge is kind of frustrating where edge 4 is a battle. And the reason it's edge 4 is because Jihad Ward, who I'm not really gives you no pass rush production. He's a good run defender. Is just far and away the edge 3 on this team. And then edge 4 is between O'Shane, the pass rush specialist that doesn't rush the passer very well, Timon Fox, who really rushes with a plan. And then I think they signed someone from the Raiders, so that's going to compete with it now.
Yeah, you're right. There is the lack of depth at that edge position. I think they're really, especially, it's a little concerning when you consider the injury history with Azeez Ojulari. Obviously, even Kayvon got a little hurt last year, but those, some of those are bad luck. I really feel like both of their injuries were bad luck last year. Maybe Kayvon less so because that happens a lot in the NFL. The Azeez one, it's like he landed wrong on his calf and it never was the same for that entire season. But definitely some excuse me to keep an eye on. But let's transition this interview, this talk a little bit, and I want to get going on kind of how you got into the industry, Bobby, because I think for a lot of people, they ask me questions like, how do I break into the industry? I want to cover football. I want to talk about fantasy. I want to talk about the Giants. And I have my spiel for what you should do to go about that. But I feel like your path was different. That's why I wanted to get you on here and to talk about it a little bit because, mine was buoyed a little bit by working with 24/7 Sports. They gave me a platform. I know Nick worked with Inside the Pylon. That gave him a little bit of a platform. And even Sports Illustrated, you were doing the stuff with Patty and Ed before the podcast, correct, Nick?
No, it was actually around the same exact time. It might have been like 2 or 3 weeks, and then I ended up kind of linking up with you through Schofield.
Okay. But I feel like for you, Bobby, you didn't really have one of those, I guess like content mediums to go through. You kind of built this all on your own. So why don't you kind of take us through how you got your start in the industry?
It's funny because every once in a while we'll get like a college student like asking me for advice. And I'm like, man, like if you told your professor what I told you, he's going to be like, don't let that guy's lucky. So basically, I try and keep a long story short. I just started a podcast with my friend called Simple Man Radio in 2018. Just talking all general sports and stuff. And I put a lot of effort into it, tried to make it as good as possible. But no one's just going to listen to any random. I mean, it's the joke, like two dudes talking about sports. How everyone has a podcast. And so I realized you had to kind of go in that niche market. And so I started the Giants Nation podcast with Danny King, who we had some company. They didn't pay us anything, but they like put their name on the podcast, Weigert Enterprises. And I met Danny King through that. So me and Danny King started the Giants Nation podcast and went through about 6-7 episodes. And I had made a connection with John Boy, so John Boy Media, who I work for. I had made a connection with him because on the previous podcast, I reached out to Talkin Yanks and then another Yankees podcast to come on the show during that 2018 playoff run. And I was hoping the other show would have responded because they were bigger at the time, but John Boy did. So I had him on the show and made the connection. And I just pitched to them, hey, you guys do Talkin Yanks. Let me do Talkin Giants for you. Me and Danny King went there. And what I think kind of really propelled us is because we were still, nothing was really setting us apart, is when Daniel Jones was drafted, a lot of people were just talking about Daniel Jones, like, media heads, but no one was actually like going. So I just started breaking down every single aspect of it. I mean, I watched every Daniel Jones Duke game like 5 times. I broke down all the third downs, all the deep passes, all the scrambles. I did threads on every game. And that's right around the time when John Boy Media started growing. Still was doing it for free. And Danny King was getting ready to do college. And I reached out to Justin, who was doing another show, to join. I even felt you out, Dan, by the way, because that's when Nick Turchin left. I was feeling you out a little bit. I was like, what do you think, we should do? And then Filato joined. So obviously that shut it down. But just kept on like grinding and doing film stuff. And honestly, I didn't know if I go look back at 2019, which was my first year doing it with the Giants, I'll be like, man, I was wrong about that, wrong about that, wrong about that. But just kind of played college football and knew the offensive line and started learning more, through watching coaching clinics and stuff. And in 2020, John Boyd Media brought me on full time. And that was when I started doing the offensive line reports. And that really propelled us into really gaining some traction, doing more and more. And it's kind of slowly grown. So it's been cool. I hope that wasn't too long of a story, but I was working a full-time job for the first 2 years of it. Gotcha. And just putting every minute in. I mean, I remember after the 2019 draft, I was up until 5 a.m. talking about Daniel Jones, Dexter Lawrence, DeAndre Baker, and then going to my job at 6:30 in the morning.
That's really, for those who are listening in and kind of wondering about like where to get their start and things like that. To me, that's always what it comes down to. Do you have a passion for this? And you could say you have a passion for this, but actually show that you have a passion for this. And the only way to literally show that is to put in an absurd amount of hours into this. The same thing happened with my start. It was just a crazy amount of hours. Mine was a little bit different. I don't know if anyone's heard the story before, but it was at an interesting point in my life where I was I actually haven't shared that part on the podcast yet, but I was going through a tough time. I'll just say that. And I reached out on Twitter. This is when Twitter was nothing back in the day. This is like 2013, I think it was, to Chris Wessling, who used to run the Roto-World. And he just put out a tweet that stood out to me. He goes, man, this Roto-World Twitter account is so woefully underutilized. So I immediately found his email and said, I'll do this for you for free. And that literally sparked everything going in my career. So I would definitely suggest, like, show your passion. Not just, you can talk about being passionate, but show it by actually doing things like that. And like Bobby said, a lot of this is you're going to have to start by not getting paid anything.
And you're going to have to start by not having anyone giving a shit about what you do. Like, the first, I remember after 2019, we put in a ton of work, went nuts, and it's like the last episode of the season had 1,000 downloads, and I was pumped. And now I look back at that now, and I'm like, gross. Like, if our podcast doesn't get that in the first 30 minutes, I'm like puking. And so you got to be ready. And this is the other thing is, don't just start, like, grow some type of platform on tweet, and I always on Twitter and other socials, but Twitter mostly is. It takes a lot for someone to click on a podcast and listen to 60 minutes, and it takes more for them to get them hooked on. So the way you do that, someone's going to like your tweets, 20 of your tweets before they ever push play on your podcast. So be very intentional with what you're tweeting. Like, don't tweet anything that you're going to like that doesn't represent what you want to be.
That's a great way to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of Twitter, Bobby, what are some of your earliest memories of Twitter? I was late. I was very late to Twitter. I actually had one of my friends who works for the MLB network created my Twitter for me because I was reticent to just jump on it. And I'm not even as probably active as I should be. But what are some of your earlier memories from when you first started out and you had like no followers?
Well, I had Twitter for like 2 years in college, and I used to tweet. There's some funny tweets on there when you look back, but I know that's not what you're asking.
Be careful with those funny tweets, by the way.
Really.
Make sure none of
I had one that I was looking at the other day because I looked up a word and it showed up, and I was like, I'm going to have a cat festival in my backyard, $5 a cat. And I was like, I was really stoned when I thought of this idea. Someone's like, it was like cat, like a word for something. I was like, the one thing I do remember is it was about actual cats. I came out guns blazing. If I saw anything I disagreed with, I was coming at your ass. Like Dan Orlovsky, and I like Dan Orlovsky. I think he's one of the best analysts in the game right now. He had the tweet about Daniel Jones, like the Lions. He's like, I like his film, but his work ethic and his arm, but he's got too much of an aw shucks mentality to me. And oh my God, I never let him forget that. I was tweeting like, there's a play Daniel Jones had in one game where it's 4th and 1, and he hands the ball off to the back, and the back is getting tackled. He literally rips the ball out of the back's hands and like gets forward for a first down, and just with going at, like, you think, all shucks, huh? All shucks, just going at anybody who disagreed. Which now is like, all right, when I see something I disagree with, most of the time I just let it, it's like, okay, they're not watching every Giants game 3 times. Like, you can't have that expectation of people.
Exactly.
So I think that was just it, like going at it with everybody. That's probably it.
I used to love watching you go at it with everybody. Schlereth, I remember, was on your hit list.
That was fun. That was more fun. Mark Schlereth was just drunk after a game and was just shit talking Giants fans. But maybe this wasn't your question, but like the dumbest thing I've ever did that blew up was it was actually Saquon Barkley after we had a following then, 2021 season. And all the reporters were like, man, he's really dejected. I was like, yeah, every question you guys ask him is like depressing. And they kept on asking him if he was going to like commemorate the moment going to Soldier Field. And he's like, no. And so I did the dub over where I'm like, would you ever think about wanting to burn down Soldier Field? and people believe that. That might be my favorite tweet of all time.
Oh, I do remember that when people were in with that. Then you had to kind of like put it like a quote tweet, like, no, this was a joke. Like, how could you not tell this?
John Halapio, who's like someone I've talked with here and there, the old Giants center, he was on the 49ers, and he messaged me. He's like, I had to tell everyone on the 49ers like that was fake. Like, they all thought that some reporter was asking Saquon Barkley if he wanted to burn down the Soldier Field.
This is so funny.
Do you understand how many people probably saw that and still believe that it's real, though? There's so many people out there. Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it got like almost 1 million views. Like, so it's like for every, 1 out of 10 person who found out it was fake, 9 people thought that a reporter at Saquon Barkley, if he wanted to burn down Soldier Field.
Jeez, Bobby, I wanted to ask you, since you were bringing up how you used to, or you do, go at people who are wrong. Did you handle the Kimberly Martin situation in week 5 with some sort of vigor?
See, that's the thing. 2019, I would have just nonstop at her. And I actually got blocked by PFF in 2019, now that I remember it. Like, at PFF has me blocked because as far as I went at PFF Sam. But that was just like, yeah, was Kimberly Martin. She was the one who said the Giants should tank when they were 5-1, right?
Yes.
I just didn't say anything. I'm like, what? Like, yes, is that the dumbest opinion ever? Yes, but I don't care. Like, so that's where I've changed a little bit with Twitter, where it's like, yeah, she said one of the dumbest things I ever heard, but I just don't have the energy to.
It's like a compulsory thing for me sometimes. Like, I want to be where you're at with this from a maturity standpoint, Bobby, but like I have a compulsion sometimes to either quote tweet someone or reply to someone when they're saying something ridiculous. Like, I got into it with some guy recently on Giants Twitter who I think he creates content for the Giants. I don't even know. I haven't seen it, but about like just like he's like talking about all the quarterback contracts and how bad they were. He's including like Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford's contract. Like, where are we going with this? Like, what are we doing here? Type of stuff. So it's hard for me sometimes not to, because I feel like sometimes people are putting these ideas out there that then get like chewed up, consumed, and then other people, like the fans, are coming back with that information at you, and you're like, like, what? How did we get to this point here in this? But like, you're right. The best thing to do is ignore it.
The main reason I ignore it is not because it's just like I don't want to disagree with this person publicly or whatever, or if it's a listener, whoever. It's not the original disagreement. It's once you do that, you're in it. Now you have to go into a 10-tweet thread with that person back and forth, and it's just like it's not like I made a joke about someone blamed Daniel Jones for the Saquon thing, and I did like the Eric Andre like shooting the guy who did this movie. And then it's like this guy's bringing up like us running laps at FanFest. I'm like,
oh my god!
It's like, yes, we did that. It was fun. I would do it again. And it's like, so now I'm in like a 10-tweet
deal
thread
whatsoever.
So now I just ignore shit.
I want to transition the interview a little bit and talk a little bit about what you do. I mean, you do a lot with Talkin Giants, but what I think you're known for, which is your film breakdowns. So I wanted to talk to you about what was your process for learning the game of football from an X's and O's standpoint. So I know obviously you played offensive line, but how do you go about trying to teach the game film analysis to the fans in a way that like everyone can consume and then understand on a broader level? That's something that I think Nick and I, for example, have been trying to strive for at all times. Like, break down the film, but also while you're doing it, give it to them and give it to everybody in a way that they can understand. Don't have this barrier for understanding. We want to try to break down that barrier. So what have you kind of done in that regard?
I just try and keep it simple with the words I'm using. Because, that can be the most annoying thing about like the real heavy like X's and O's people. And it's like they just talk over people. And it's like, even like something as simple as like stacking a corner. Like if I'm talking about that, explain it. And then you can use that, throughout the rest of the video. Which is like, I didn't know what stacking a corner meant in 2018. And I played college football, but I had no idea what stacking a corner meant. Just trying to keep it pretty simple. And it's like, if you're going through a passing concept, like if you're going through like something simple like dagger, like explain, hey, yeah, that guy's running deep down the field, but you're not going to throw it there unless they leave him wide open. Shout out Darius Slayton dropped in that Commanders game. So just kind of like keeping it simple with the explanation. Like, this is just the clear out space. This is the first read. This is the second read. So just trying to keep it fairly simple.
Outside of the offensive line, Bobby, which is your favorite position to evaluate?
I'm going to say quarterback is fun. And that's the most fun when it's some good play. But I'm going to say defensive line because it's just watching an edge or defensive lineman going against offensive line is more consistent. Linebacker in the NFL, I actually really like watching when it's good. But the hardest thing, like watching, like doing evaluating college linebackers has become so much harder now that you know more about it compared to when you just watch the guy shoot gaps when I first started doing this, because it's just like they're throwing so much at you. Is this guy fitting the run well? Is this guy just a gap shooter, downhill guy? So it's like that's where it's kind of gotten hard. But I really do watching linebacker play, but defensive end, because it's just watching a defensive end put the work to a tackle is very fun.
The matchup between a defensive end and an offensive tackle is so fun because it's snap in and snap out. If you just focus on that matchup, you could see the chess game between each player and what they're trying to do to manipulate the other. And in terms of the linebacker, man, how difficult it is in today's game with the RPOs and the tags and that, like how they have to respect the pass, but they also have to execute their run assignment, their run responsibility. It's a very difficult assignment, and I do not envy being a linebacker. If there's one position I wouldn't want to be, it's probably that.
And they're all 6 foot 220, which is really annoying now too.
Yeah. They're small.
They kind of have to be at this stage, and that is definitely. I agree with you on that, both of you on that. I feel like it's interesting what you mentioned, Nick, about the offensive tackle versus defensive end battle, because I feel like at times you brought this up at one point on the podcast, Nick, and we talked about it a bunch. It almost felt like it looked just like so simple and easy for Andrew Thomas at times. Like he wasn't even giving 100% max effort. It looked like almost, but he actually was. It was just the technique was so sound, and he was so adept at understanding where this defensive end was going to attack him. And so I think it's cool sometimes to focus on like just the little intricacies, like you said, about that position battle. But one other question I wanted to ask you about, Bobby, on like an overall basis from a film standpoint, do you feel that there's maybe one position or a concept or anything like that where there's the biggest difference between what people see on the all 22 film versus what you get on the broadcast?
Ooh, difference between. That's the one nice thing about evaluating Jason Garrett is like you saw everything on the broadcast. So it's like with Dable and Kafka, it's like, all right, we got to wait a little bit to see exactly what happened with this play. I don't know about a concept. I think it's more so just like when a guy's wide open it's like a backside alert, which is like the quarterback's not going here, and a guy will get open on a streak, and it's like, yeah. Can we pause it and be like, that guy's open? Yes, but the quarterback's not supposed to look there. I think that's the more frustrating thing is like when you can look at the next gen DOS and like, see, this guy's open. It's like, well, he wasn't part of the progression. He was literally, if they wanted to throw the alert on it, if they want to come back to that, now they can see that. But I would say, I think that's the value of what we do is like, we can put quarterback play into like, hey, this is what's happening, compared to you really weren't getting these film analysis. But it's also the most annoying thing because people don't know how to talk about anything besides quarterback. So a lot of times people are just flat out wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And I feel like that's something that we're trying to bridge the gap to with fans and just trying to give a different kind of look at how to evaluate the team. That's always been the goal for Nick and I, at least, like more of an X's and O's type of analysis rather than just kind of like the talking head type stuff.
Yeah, and to expound upon that too, when you think about watching all 22, not only do you see like the individual technique of defensive linemen and offensive linemen and things like that, but it really comes down to the safety rotation as well, which you can't really see on the broadcast film. I want to know what those safeties are doing. I want to know Daniel Jones, what is first thing he usually checks once he catches the football out of shotgun? What's that safety doing? Okay, he's rolling to his left. Now I know I have an advantageous matchup to the right or to the left, and I have a one-on-one matchup or however the play shakes out depending on the passing concept. It's just where those safeties are and then what Daniel Jones does depending on how the safety rotates. And you just don't really get that on the broadcast film. So that's like one thing that I always kind of look at is what is that safety doing, or both of those.
Especially with DJ, who's kind of a pretty pre-snap oriented quarterback too, which it's like he's good at reading pre-snap and then seeing that first movement and then picking a side and reading a player and pulling the trigger.
And he's done better. We've seen that because we've covered Daniel Jones. You and I started doing this professionally, Bobby, Dan as well, around the time the Giants drafted Daniel Jones. And I've seen a progression from when he was a young quarterback till now, how he manipulates safety, how patient he is holding the safety in place, influencing that safety just a little bit outside the hash. All right, now I have the time to thread the needle and deliver this post ball. And that's something that I want to see a little bit more often, but I've seen him hold those safeties and utilize patience to his advantage to allow a play to fully manifest itself.
Well, hopefully we can see this year. I've heard you guys talk about it, and it was my biggest critique of DJ this past year. Is those sideline hole shots, whether it's on like a smash count. That was the biggest critique I had of Daniel. Like he would go through games where it's like he's making it's not regular for a QB to make the right read on all these, but the one times he were those like there wasn't a ton of guys going wide open deep. There's a couple of times, but it was those sideline hole shots on smash concepts or whatever. And then he
The
just
field side.
didn't pull the trigger on those. And that was the thing that was the most worrisome, because 2019, he's pulling the trigger on that. And so that's my question now, is as they try and become a little more downfield oriented with Darren Waller adding some speed in the receiving corps, is Daniel Jones going to start doing that? Or did 2 years of Jason Garrett and this past season working for a contract turn him into a conservative quarterback? The Alex Smith type quarterback.
That's the game manager, as people would call him.
That's the number one question that has to be answered. And I think to both your points, like, I've seen him grow in both regards. It would be stupid to say like a quarterback wouldn't grow. If he didn't grow in either regard, they wouldn't have re-signed him. But I do feel like most of the growth has come in the pre-snap processing that you mentioned, Bobby, and less of the growth has come in the post-snap processing, because that's really what it comes when you're going to make those throws, like you just mentioned, those sideline hole shots. Like everyone talks about, like, he can't do it. The offensive line's not protecting. Well, honestly, those things are available early if you just get the ball out and you have an idea of where they're going to be and you throw the anticipation before those things are open. It's not really, in my mind, like, yeah, you want to talk about like a deep post or something like that, or a double move to a go route. Like, sure, you need some protection for those plays. But the sideline hole shots, like, you just need to get the ball out fast and throw them before they're open.
Well, think about it. Last year, how many from the pocket? So it's not a move the pocket type of play. You're standing in the pocket. How many times did Daniel Jones target the sidelines from like the number 2 receiver? So you're not just throwing to the number 1 running a vertical. Off the top of my head, especially to the field side, the only ones that really come to my mind, I think there was one to Tanner Hudson in Chicago, and then there was one to Wan'Dale Robinson maybe in the Detroit game before he ended up getting injured. Like, there really weren't that many where I'm going to stand in the pocket, I'm going to attack the field sideline. And that is something that defensive coordinators have circled, and now Daniel Jones needs to prove them wrong. We saw that with Jack Del Rio, the way he was playing Daniel Jones in both matchups, but specifically in week 15. It was like, I'm not even going to respect the field side to you. I'll have an apex defender who's going to cover basically the 1 to 10 yard line from the hash all the way to the sideline. That's how much I don't respect you. And I'm going to allocate my resources to the other side of the field. And what did we see? We saw an offense. It was stifled. It was a stifled offense. The only touchdown they scored that game was the Kayvon Thibodeau one. So It's something that he definitely needs to rectify. And I'm hoping that he can, because of all the reasons that you guys brought up. Maybe it was Jason Garrett holding him back. Maybe he did have the contract on his mind. Maybe he can be a little bit more aggressive now.
It'll be interesting to just see what the offense is this year, because it went under so many changes last year. We did a Sterling Shepard episode, and I wonder how much he coincided with the change after week 3, because that's when the offense really made its change. Because week 3 is like week 1 and week 2 is when Daniel Jones looked at his worst despite the Giants winning. Like, it was the first time I ever just saw him look uncomfortable, and there was like big gains he left on the field. And then week 3 was the game where he was taking all those throws and the wide receivers are dropping them, and Shep gets hurt, who was, their wide receiver 1 at the time. And that's when they changed into more of the under center play action stuff. And then once teams started, once they weren't able to run the ball very well in that stretch, that's when they went to that drop back quick game. So with the new players, that's something that coaches preach of, like, we adapt to our players, and they just never do. But the coaching staff last year actually proved, no, we will do that.
Yes.
But that's not what they wanted to do. What they did the first 3 weeks of the season is what they ideally want to, run more. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that was, weapons, how much of that Daniel Jones. But also the main thing could have been Evan Neal, who I am my number 1 player I'm watching at camp. I am anxiously waiting to see what he looks like, because I think camp will tell the story, because a lot of the stuff that he struggled with last year was showing up in camp too.
Yeah, and I want to see what you're sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say Evan Neal is a huge X factor, but I wanted to say one thing on your point that you brought up. Daniel Jones in the first 2 weeks of the season last year had 41 rushing yards combined. And then in that Dallas game, week 3, he had 79. And I feel like that was one of the first adaptations that we saw from this coaching staff after they realized, hey, Daniel Jones is tough as hell. We know that now after he took that beating on Monday Night Football, but he can really extemporize and use his legs to pick up first downs. Let's really leverage that asset that Daniel Jones had, because you're right, we did not really see that all that often in Tennessee or Carolina. And then after that, we ended up going up 12, 13 personnel. We're going to run the football. And then again, Chicago in week 4, Daniel Jones had 2 play action boot keeps that he ran for like 17-yard touchdowns.
There was like, when people were like, oh, everyone was keyed in on Saquon, I was like, yeah, there were some run blitzes and stuff, but it wasn't as dramatic as people made it, besides the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears were just going all out to stop Saquon Barkley. It was like, man, what are you guys doing on defense right now?
You're right too about that, because a lot of people make that point. Like everyone was so excited, focused on stopping Saquon. But I feel like you said, like as we got further into the season on those zone reads, every single team was respecting DJ on the zone read. They weren't crashing like they were earlier in that Bears game. So it's like, I don't know about that, but it was. Wait, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick. Did you have
the
a point?
Texans also did too, which was
I would say
why we handed it off 35 times in that game.
Yeah, the Texans are just inept at stopping the run, but they did sell out. I think you can maybe argue Carolina to some degree, because you remember how they shut down the Giants rushing attack, and they were just using like an odd front, like stacked defense with like 6-7 guys in the box. And every play that the Giants tried to get tricky, they brought Saquon out in the wildcat in the red zone. It was like, it was like nothing like they did against Tennessee. So that's another team that I felt like did a really good job just shutting Saquon Barkley down, but the Giants still were able to get the dub.
Yeah, and that was a game where DJ left like 100 yards. That was the most frustrated I was with DJ all year, because he left like over 100 yards on the field that game.
Yeah, yes. And I think even you mentioned it at the time, Nick. They were kind of using not the exact same style of front, but similar to what the Giants did to stop Derrick Henry. And it's like, if you're going to use that on defense, yes, I can agree with you that the whole defensive game plan is to stop one player. But if you're not doing that, which was basically not the case all but the Bears game, as Bobby mentioned, I don't really think goes into a whole philosophical football debate I've had on Twitter the last couple of weeks, but it's like, I just don't feel like it's the same thing as like what people do to stop Justin Jefferson or what people do to stop Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow with the too high stuff. So it's like, I don't know. It's an interesting debate in football. Obviously it's raging right now. I saw Robert Griffin had his tweet today about his disgust with how much Barkley is making versus Daniel Jones, but it is what it is. I wanted to get with you. Actually, before I get to this next question, you mentioned something I wanted to expound on. You said a lot of what Evan Neal struggled with last season, you're going to be able to focus on and see if it's changed or fixed itself or improved in camp. Can you expand on that a little bit?
It's basically starts with the start of the snap, right? Like, and he changed his stance with Willie Anderson, which I think is actually going to help, but he was just very slow off the snap and going into those aggressive pass sets where you're kind of sliding back at a 45-degree angle. He just wasn't able to get to that third step. And so he wasn't getting to that step. He was opening his hips and allowing the corner. And then when he's running around the corner, well, he's already top heavy, which is his main issue. And then that's like allowing guys like Hassan Reddick to jack up that inside shoulder. So, I mean, it's just going to be, I'm going to be watching his feet. Like, get to that third step. Get to that third step, and I feel like we got something to work with. But if he's struggling to get to that third step and opening up his hips and opening up the gate for rushers, then I think the Giants are got to be a little worried.
So how quick can he get to that third step? How balanced is he once he gets there is what we should be looking for.
And I think once he's connected, he's fairly solid, or at least he will be. It's just get off the snap, because a lot of times it was just like, man, you are just slow off the snap. And I know they changed his stance to make it more compact, to let him fire out of it a little quicker. Kind of more similar to Andrew Thomas's stance. And in the run game, stop fucking false stepping.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on a little bit. I want to get your opinion. This is an interesting one that I thought you might have a good insight on, that fans asked me about as well. What was, in your mind, the biggest misconception that Giants fans as a whole had about the 2022 season? You can go any direction with this, versus what actually showed up and played out on the game film.
Oh, man. DJ, I think people kind of got a good grasp of what that was. I will say, I'll go back to it. Teams like that middle of the season when they were losing is that they were forcing the run and they shouldn't have been. They were trying to run the ball and they shouldn't have been. And they were putting Daniel Jones in bad situation. Now, coaching staff changed. But they were running that Commanders tie. Drove me nuts. It was 2nd and 13, and we were running play action from under center.
Yeah.
And it was not like everything besides those, any type of drop back passing they did on 1st and 2nd down was successful. And we were saying, like, you got to work. I'm not saying you got to bomb it away, but you got to get to some drop back game. And that struggles in the middle of the season were not like, oh, Daniel Jones couldn't do it because they were stopping Saquon Barkley. That was when it was like, they're forcing the run right now and they shouldn't be. And that Texans game they won that Texans game. That was an offensive game plan I did not like. The only points they scored were on drives where they threw the ball. All of their points came from throwing the ball, but they handed the ball off 35 times because they could beat a bad Texans team doing that. But they should have put up 40 points in that game. Like, the Texans were selling out to stop the run, and they just kept on handing it off. So I'll say that the issue was more of them trying to run the ball when running the ball wasn't working, more so than it wasn't Daniel Jones. But I feel like I'm trying to think, because that seems like a little DJ Homerism.
I don't think it's DJ Homerism. I think part of the issue that people, aren't thinking about during that time period was how many injuries did the Giants have at receiver, right? And how many new guys were they bringing in? And what did we learn earlier in the year? We learned that David Sills was playing because Kadarius Toney couldn't get as far as they wanted in the playbook. We learned that this is an offense that has choice routes. It's harder for these receivers to get on the same page with the quarterback as, like maybe a Jason Garrett style offense. Not that we had much chemistry there. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's why Hodgins was such a godsend. It's like, okay, at least we get to run 11 personnel and have 3 options we can at least trust.
The NFL's a grind, right? And the Giants had so many injuries at the wide receiver position, and we were relying going in at this time. We're like, oh, Kenny Galladay's going to have a bounce back year. Kadarius, those guys weren't factors whatsoever. And it took to the Detroit Lions game where the Giants got their asses kicked, right? They were down big at halftime. So what did they do? They just kept rolling out 11 personnel with this new receiver that they had named Isaiah Hodgins. And they developed a rapport. And I know he only had like 3 catches in that game, but I've said this several times in the podcast, and I stand by it. I think the Giants getting their ass kicked against the Detroit Lions really helped set them up for success because they started really toying and tinkering with their quick passing attack out of 11 personnel, and it gave Isaiah Hodgins valuable reps with Daniel Jones that they were able to leverage later in the season. And that was a big reason why the Giants had success a little bit later on that, and they were playing Minnesota, who frankly, I don't know what Ed Donatel was doing, but their defense sucked both times the Giants played them.
I hope the too high fad goes away. Like the offenses have kind of figured it out, and teams are running all over you. Like I hope that's kind of why Wink was a little refreshing this year, even though I did like Patrick Graham. I'm trying
Football's going to be so much more fun to watch if that fad goes away. So much more fun. And a general basis, we're going to get so many more big plays in the passing game if that goes away.
I mean, it's secular too, where it's like too high, teams quick game, teams adapt, then we're going to stop the run. It's you know what? I'll say Slayton. Slayton was so important, and I know the Giants brought him back, and drops are the biggest way to get in the bad graces of a fan base. I understand that, and he should be criticized for that. But he was, when people are like, oh, without Saquon, they don't make the playoffs. Well, without Daniel Jones, they're out marching. If without Darius Slayton, they do not make the playoffs. And that was my biggest disagreement with this regime to start, was like, you guys are going to cut Darius Slayton? Like, are you guys out of your mind? And then even though, those first 2 weeks, why is Darius Slayton not? Why is David Sills on the field and Darius Slayton not? And then he finally gets once again, Darius Slayton is producing for the Giants. Is he perfect? Is he everything we hoped for after that great 2019 season? No, but man, he's been reliable outside of he's been. I mean, imagine this offense with at the end of the year with Isaiah Hodgins, not fast, Richie James, a slot, quick game guy, and Marcus Johnson, who was the only guy who had a bad catch rate on the team last year.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Darius Slayton was the reason for the vast majority of the explosive plays through the passing game last year. It was Darius Slayton. I'm trying to think of who else. I think Saquon had one. I think Isaiah Hodgins might have had the one
double moves.
And that's
two double moves with Hodgins versus Patrick Peterson.
They had the Richie James switch release against the Vikings. They got a couple big ones from that. And that's honestly with leaving meat on the bone. He had his drops, as obviously the fans talk about, but it wasn't just the drops. There were times where he was open on the vertical plane, Seattle, Washington, whatever it may be, and the ball didn't come his way. So you may want to knock him for the drop the time he drops it, but then you should also give him credit for the times he's open on the vertical plane and the ball's not coming there, because that's not on him at that point. But yeah, even the Green Bay game, I mean, that could have been a touchdown too when he's crossing on that deep crosser and the ball's behind him as well. So it's like, I'm so happy you brought that up, Bobby, because I'm a big believer that I have few guys that I think were much better on film than fans give him credit for, and Slayton is certainly one of them, because I think as a fan base and just as a general human nature thing, we have this idea, or this, I want to call it an inherent bias, maybe that's not the right word, that if we just put so much weight on drop passes, like they're worth everything, but it's like, okay, or how much are they actually worth? Because if someone can't get open at all, I'd rather have the guy who gets open constantly and drops a few passes than the guy who can't get open but catches everything in his direction, David Sills or something like that. Like, how is that possibly worth more?
And also, as fans, we build players up and then to this pedestal, and then when they don't reach, that's Slayton. And Slayton, that week 1 2020 game, comes out with over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. I was like, oh, this guy maybe could be a wide receiver 1. in the Jason Garrett offense, still put up 750 yards, but not as successful. And then it's like you're all out on him, which is why I'm interested to see what happens with Isaiah Hodgins this year.
Mm-hmm.
Because Isaiah Hodgins was a godsend, good route runner, but like, does he have the speed? Can he make contested catches down the field and add that? Like I'm very appreciative for Hodgins, but I wonder what the view from the fan base will be on Hodgins, because I think he's been built up to be so much, and will the fan base like try and tear him down if he's doing even like just similar stuff to he did last year? I can see that happening.
I also think, to a previous point, just about fans being frustrated about Darius Slayton. Let's be fair to Giant fans here. There have been a lot of situations where the Giants lost because players have dropped the football, and I feel like it's
absolutely.
just dumb. Like Evan Ingram and Darius Slayton probably being the
Right.
two primary people to really put under the spotlight when it comes to that. But I just think that is left a really sour taste in the mouth of a lot of Giant fans, and that's one reason why Darius Slayton maybe catches more than he should.
And he deserves criticism. I'm not
Right.
saying like, oh, don't, like, he deserves criticism, but it was like we needed him last year. Like he should have been playing week 1 and week 2. But yeah, I agree. Like that Vikings game, if the Giants lost that, it's another Darius Slayton game, like that Commanders week 3 game in 2021.
So Bobby, you mentioned your affinity for Isaiah Hodgins, but Dan and I, at the end of every podcast, after every film review, we go over our most unheralded players of the game. So other than Isaiah Hodgins from last season, who is Bobby Skinner's most unheralded player from the 2022 team?
Ben Bredesen.
There you go.
He was their second best offensive lineman last year. And year 3 can be the year where guards pop. And
Right.
to me, I'm very frustrated that left guard is a position battle and not right guard. Like I think Mark Lewinsky's job should not be safe. I think it should be like a 3-way battle for both guard spots between Azudu and Bredesen and Lewinsky. Like Bredesen was clearly their second best offensive line, especially as a pass protector. And he actually had some of the best like pass pro efficiency numbers for guards this season, but he missed a lot of games. I think Lewinsky can do some more things in the run game with his athleticism too. But Ben Bredesen was a solid pass protector outside of the week 1 Titans game. And then in the Packers game, Kenny Clark got him a few times.
Yeah, you're right. We talked a lot about Ben Bredesen and how we liked his tape last year. We were I think maybe the injuries kind of played a factor in derailing his season a little bit and just harder to get back on track. But I'm with you. I would like, in an ideal world, I would like to see that be open competition for left guard and right guard. That kind of a question I had for you later, but we can get to it now, is what would be Bobby Skinner's ideal offensive line for week 1?
Ideal would be Bredesen at right guard and Zudu at left guard. But I'm just going to deal in reality. I think the Giants are trying to win now. Azudu, hey, if Azudu wins it out, hell yeah, that's what I want. But I think Bredesen is going to be a better pass protector right now, and it allows Azudu to grow still. You know, I know he had that neck injury, so how much growth did he have? But yeah, ideally, I'd like it to be Bredesen at right guard and Azudu at left. But yeah, so Thomas, Bredesen, John Michael Smiths, Lewinsky, and then Neal. Neal's, I know we talked about it earlier. I am praying that Evan Neal's good, because it either stops them from doing a lot of things offensively or allows them to do. Because we know you don't need the best protection in the world to get big plays versus man coverage. You need good wide receivers. But where Brian Dable and Mike Kafka can make their money is if you can protect and you put defenders in conflict down the field versus zone coverages. But you can't really do a lot of that stuff if your right tackle is a turnstile.
You're right.
No, this is really early to say this, and I am not advocating for this whatsoever, Bobby. But if Evan Neal replicates his performance from his rookie season, do you start to entertain moving him to guard?
If he's the same player that he was last year, which was really bad, maybe. I mean, he did play guard in college, but I mean, you're looking at tackle in the draft. Like you can't go off of hope. And we've seen some guys figure it out in year 3. You know, Garrett Bowles and Denver figured it out a little later. Jawan Taylor, who just got a deal from the Chiefs, figured it out a little later. So, I would say no, because I know at least Evan Neal's a worker. Like, yes, he's not the most athletic tackle in the world, but he's athletic for his size. So because I know Evan Neal is going to bust his ass, I would say no. Where Eric Flowers, everyone brings up Eric Flowers. Like what Eric Flowers' biggest issue? He was an asshole who was lazy. Like that was the biggest Eric Flowers issue, more so than his really bad mind. I can't believe we picked him top 10. Anyways,
that was a bad stretch of like to go Flowers Apple back to back, but it's just crazy to think about how they came to those decisions at the time. It's just wild.
Who watches Miami film? It's bad. Like it's not. It's not very good.
It almost looks like. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
He was really big. He was really physical. And that's what they loved. Like he couldn't do a kick step at the fucking combine. Like he couldn't move.
It's crazy. Think about like how fast do you think you're going to be able to train someone to do that? Like it's not going to be 2 months. It's not going to be maybe never. Like
he's also like 22, I think, right, Dan?
Yeah, that was part of it. I know the same thing with Apple. Apple was young when they drafted him. They said they like that. They want to develop these guys. The younger you get him, the better. I get it. Like Joe Shane did a lot of that last year in his first year with the drafting, but it's like it can't be the only factor. It can't be it can't just be athleticism and age as your only 2 factors there in the draft. But yeah, that was frustrating, of course. I want to ask you, you talked already about let's get into this one. This one's interesting. What would be your best guess for what actually happens with this Giants wide receiver group? Will anyone emerge 80% plus snap share? What happens to the Richie James slot role? Those types of questions.
The most annoying thing is you got to preface it with injuries with Shep and Wandale. I'm just going to say because of that, Hodgins, Slayton, and Campbell will be the starters to start. Obviously, Campbell has some inside-outside. And I would like to see Campbell a little more on the outside, too. Like I think that's where his best route running shows up, even though he was very successful, like very zone last year in the slot. I think that'll be his home. But I think he can do a little more on the outside than he's given credit for. But and Campbell was a guy I loved out of Ohio State. Was the first draft that we ever covered. And I remember watching Haskins, like, this Campbell guy is, like, creating all of these yards. So I think those 3, but Shep is their best wide receiver if he's the same level that he was at the start of last year, but does he play? And I think the Cole Beasley signing is more than people are making it out to be. Cole Beasley at 34 years old didn't just show up to be a camp body. Like he's showing up to play. Like he plans to play, and he played 50% of the snaps for the Bills in the playoffs last year, even had a touchdown in like a 29-yard game. And his game is very much predicated on that short area, quick game, running those option routes, which is something Dable and Kafka really like. And the Bills struggled last year without Beasley in the slot. They even they moved Diggs into the slot a bunch to try and compensate, and it got them off schedule a little bit, which led to some of the turnovers. So I think Beasley makes this team. Wandale, I don't know when he's coming back from the injury. And then who else am I missing on this?
Do you think Hodgins? One of my predictions has been Hodgins will play by far and away the most snaps on the Giants at receiver and be the most productive receiver. Do you feel like that's going to hold? My whole thought process on that is his blocking and his size allows him to play the boundary versus. And I mean, you brought up a good point. Like maybe that does change with Campbell on the roster because he can play on the outside. And I know we've seen Shepard do it at times in the past as well.
I think Hodges probably will play the most because they have so much trust in him. Like you said, they really do like him. But I'm going to say Slayton still leads them in yards because Slayton like there was games last year where it's like, man, Isaiah Hodges, great game. And it's like, yeah, Darius Slayton, 4 catches for 85 yards, outgained it. Like it just happens like that. And that's why Slayton's so valuable as a big play. But I'll say Hodges probably leads them in playing time, but Slayton probably gets them in yards. And Hodges, a lot of his values in the red zone too. It'll be interesting to see how much he's able to, transfer that this year too.
I want to know one thing that I just thinking about the personnel the Giants have. One of the best things Mike Kafka did last year was tinkering and toying with different personnel groupings, right? And we've been talking about this a lot with the 13 personnel package that consists of Bellinger, Waller, and Lawrence Cager, and how they can really use that to their advantage to get the defense into mismatches. I think they're going to do the same with Paris Campbell, only use him in a way that's like 21 personnel. Because we saw the Giants experiment with that pony package last year with Matt Breida, and they had a lot of success in big situations in the playoffs down the stretch of the year. They can do the same, roll out an 11 personnel package and have Paris Campbell operate in the role that we all thought Wan'Dale Robinson would thrive in if he were to be healthy. And that's kind of operating out of the backfield and the slot, really aligning wherever the hell you need him to be. He can play running back for you in a 21 pony type of package, but he can also be your slot receiver. And to Bobby's point, he can play outside. So I think Paris Campbell, his diversified skill set and his versatility is going to allow Mike Kafka and Brian Dable to really just do a lot of creative things that we might not have seen yet.
What do you guys think happens with Jalen Hyatt as a rookie? It's like we just talked about receivers and didn't even bring him up.
We didn't even bring him up.
It's hard to say right now because we don't know how far along he is. We're just kind of speculating on how good he's going to be as a route runner. I think he's just going to be slowly ingratiated into the lineup unless he's ready to go, because the Giants have options if they all stay healthy, knocking on wood. If they stay healthy, you don't have to rely on Jalen Hyatt. But if the Giants are forced to play him, then he might just get thrown to the fire.
I do think we might see, that if they're forced, like the injuries happen like they did last year, like, and obviously they've done their best right now to provide insurance policies for what happened last year. Like, remember all those injuries that one happened. Like they were, like Bobby said, they maybe could have played Slayton, and should have, but we had David Sills running routes out there. You can't have that at the NFL level, and Marcus Johnson. But what's interesting to me is like, I think back at some of the takeaways I had from the film, and one of them that always stood out to me was when I watched the Giants at the line of scrimmage on all 22, there was even when they went to 11 personnel, there was only one player on the entire roster last year where corners would play 10 yards off the ball against, and it was Darius Slayton. Every single other player, these corners were matched up above the right on these receivers. And it's like, maybe there are packages early on where they can just get Slayton and Hyatt on the field at the exact same time, just so they can open things up a little bit more, because corners are going to have to play off high, unless it's a situation where it's like, we didn't really know, and they could just press jam him at the line of scrimmage and he's got no option against that. That's not good. But if that's not the case, or if they do a lot of what they did last year toward the end, which is like those stacked formations with easy free releases for these receivers, kind of like what Tennessee did with Hyatt, then getting those two on the field is going to add a different element of speed and force defenses to play them differently. So I wonder if there is an opportunity to get him on the field early, at least, or when Slayton's on the field.
We can put out 11 personnel of Waller, Campbell, Hyatt, and Slayton, and it's like, yep. Besides Waller, are these the best wide receivers in the world? No, but you got to respect speed on both sides, where last year you didn't. And the part that excites me more than just maybe creating explosives in the passing game is like, all right, put someone down in the box. No, you won't. And then we're getting, hand the ball off and create some more explosive runs, which despite all Saquon's success last year, wasn't creating the same explosive runs that we saw earlier in his career. And
that's something you've talked about in the past, Bobby, that I completely agree with. Either you or Justin has talked about this a bunch, and I know, Nick, we have as well. And I'll let you I know you want to say something, Nick. I just want to get to this. We both agree and feel pretty confident that the Giants' run game could get more explosives, like you just mentioned, with lighter boxes. We don't need to have 12 personnel to get these runs. Like, you can do them in many different ways. One of the ways you just talked about, getting speed on the field, could actually help the Giants in that regard.
Let's not forget, last year, Marcus Johnson ran the fourth most routes of all the wide receivers. And I get that there was a lot of injuries, but do you remember Marcus Johnson making one impactful catch?
Green Bay. And then it was like, oh, look, Marcus Johnson. And then never again.
And then nothing. He had like 10 catches on the season. That just goes.
I might feel like was that Jacksonville game when he had that drop in the red zone.
When he had the drop and Daniel Jones yelled at him. And
that was just it for him.
But my point is, a lot of the plays when Marcus Johnson was out there were these play action passes out of like 12 personnel with Marcus Johnson, Darius Slayton. That's going to be Jalen Hyatt's role if he's up for it. Like, Jalen Hyatt can start at that. That's the bar. That's the floor for Jalen Hyatt. And then we can see what else he can add. And
maybe there can be a threat to pull the trigger. And Nick, man, every time, and this is crazy, like when you cover a team, it's like, man, we kind of know more than the team than the DCs that are covering. Because like every time Marcus Johnson was on the field at the end of the season, it was 12 personnel. It's like, all right, here comes Yankee. Here comes Yankee. Marcus Johnson on the deep post, Slayton, and it happened in the Vikings game. And we were live streaming, so I was just like, you always feel good when you call a play. I was like, Yankees, Johnson deep post, Slayton crosser, bam, 60-yard Slayton pass. And it was just like every time he was on the field at the end of the year, once they got Hodgins, that was what they were running.
And why didn't Ed Donatel see that in film study? That's the weird part to me when that type of stuff. It is. It's like, how does he not see that? It was all there for him, and he has a week to prepare for this playoff game. It just, I agree with you. Sometimes it is odd when those types of things happen.
And we had Sean Syed on our podcast, and he was talking about the cover 4 match principle defense that they run. You need to be cohesive, and you need your communication to be on par. Anytime Slayton ran a deep over in that game, they never passed him off. It was like, what the you doing, guys? Like, you're not passing the guy off. Darius Slayton had like 2 huge catches. I think he had more explosive plays than the rest of the Giants wide receivers in the first half of that Minnesota Vikings game.
Yeah, the Vikings defense and Vikings, even on offense, I remember because we had Sean Syed on too, and I think I remember talking to one of you guys about this, and maybe when you guys came on the pod, is like, hey, why don't the Vikings run like one gap run versus the Giants? Like they just like the Giants can stop zone run, they cannot stop any gap run, and you guys like pull Ed Ingram one time. He's athletic.
You know what Sean said to us?
Did not do it.
He said to us that they didn't even practice it. Like he didn't see one. I think he said he saw less than a handful of reps of it all season going into that game. So maybe it's just like that's the issue there. But it's like the Giants are allocating every resource possible on defense to take away Justin Jefferson, and yet 2 games for Dalvin Cook, he really doesn't make much of an impact, and that goes to show like that. You run a little power gap there to pull someone, like you said, pull Ed Ingram one play. Who knows what could have happened in that game? All right, let's wrap up here, Bobby, with one more, and then we'll get you out of here because this one went a little bit long. But I wanted to get your final thought on the position battle and training camp you're looking forward to most.
So I think inside linebacker 2 is like the most open, but it's the one I'm looking forward to the least out of Micah McFadden versus Darian Beavers. One I'm looking for. So we actually just went through this. So you got left guard, RB2 with Gray and Breida. You got linebacker, edge, safety outside McKinney. I think there's 5 guys who can win that job. Pinnock, who's probably the most athletic of the group and play for them. Belton, who they drafted in the 4th round, and we found out a month ago that he was dealing with an injury, and that's why he wasn't getting the playing time. And I remember you liked him a lot, Dan. You talked about it on the pod. Bobby McCain, who's got a lot of coverage experience. And I came away from the draft saying I really like day 3, and I know that's something that fans say after every freaking draft, but I truly meant it. And Javarius Owens, despite being a 7th round pick, I think can play a little ball. And I'm excited. Like he's one of the players I'm most excited to see in camp. And then you got Nick McLeod, who like they've kind of moved over to safety. So I think there's 5 guys who can be like by the end of the year might win them, have the most reps out of that group. I think Belton's probably the favorite for it. But safeties, I think, is going to be the most the most intriguing one to see.
That's interesting because I don't think Belton is necessarily the favorite for it. If I had to put odds on it, I would say either Nick McLeod or McCain. But I think Belton's in the conversation. I think all of them are going to be used. I think you're going to see some big dime packages where Okereke, it's not going to be quarter. Okereke will still be out there. I think there might be some plays where he's not, but Okereke is athletic enough to live in those smaller personnel packages while still adding some physicality if they do decide to run the football, which the Giants were coming out like 1st and 10 against Green Bay being like, hey, we have 7 defensive backs out here. What do you do? But right now, you have Bobby McCain, you have Dane, but like Trey Hawkins, if he can really step, there's a lot of players who are defensive backs who are going to operate in that smaller personnel package. And I'm excited to see it, specifically for McCain and Belton, because both those guys are really deceptive in the short underneath zones in terms of playing one route and then going to the subsequent route and manipulating the quarterback and causing either PBUs or interceptions. And I also feel like Javarius Owens, who was playing from depth a lot at Houston, he's another player who falls into that category.
And one final thing on what you just mentioned, Nick, and we can get Bobby out of here. And I know everyone already knows it, but we're gonna have you tell people where they can follow your work, including not just your Talkin Giants work, because you've expanded the coverage with John Boy. And I don't know if everybody knows about that, but it's still some great, excellent film breakdowns during the year and in the off season for the draft. But to your point you just had, Nick, I feel like that's maybe the thing I'm most excited about watching the Giants this year. It's that idea that like we're gonna see them have some games where the matchup between the Giants defensive front and whoever the team's offensive line is, especially if that team's running zone, they can just allocate all their resources to the pass game and still stop the run. 7 defensive backs on the field, 6 defensive backs on the field because of that defensive front. And when you can do that, it gives you such an edge, in my opinion, from a defensive standpoint, from schematic standpoint.
And that's one reason why I think Nick McLeod might be the starter, because to me, I think he's the best run defender. Bobby McCain is a speed bump run defender, right? He's going to get in your way. He's going to be annoying, but he's not like a really true impactful type of guy. Dane Belton just needs to work on his angles a little bit more, but Nick McLeod, he's a pretty sure tackler. If all things go well for him, he could slide into the Julian Love role and at least play up to maybe like 80 to 85% of that.
That would be awesome for the Giants. All right, Bobby, why don't you tell everyone where they can find your work?
Yeah, Talkin Giants, whether it's YouTube, the podcast, Talking without the G, so Talkin apostrophe Giants. And then at Bobby Skinner _ on Twitter. Yeah, so check out the pod. I mean, during this month is probably the most content we have because we do podcasts every single day. We're at camp and stuff like that. So that, you search Talkin Giants and it should show up.
And is the Talkin Football page still going?
I'm giving them an ultimatum because I want them
Okay.
to. I want the company to take football more serious. So I'm going to be
Okay.
like, all right, bring some people to do some football, or I am bringing everything back to because I did I've done draft breakdowns on the Jam
Right.
Football channel for 2 years, and you see me venting a little bit right now. I've done draft breakdowns, which is like put a lot of work in those. They're channel growers, and I put them on a different channel last 2 years, and then the season starts, and we got no one that's really like paying attention
Right.
to the general NFL. So we'll to be determined, but I'll tweet out the links when you see them. So follow me at Bobby Skinner.
All right, there you go. Thanks everyone else for tuning in, and have a great rest of your week.